Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and this is going to be a viewer games and questions show. We've been doing this off and on, those kinds of shows for several years now. I'm not sure when we started it, but I think it's gone back pretty close to the beginning. And speaking of beginnings, or what corresponds to beginnings, and that's ends, this is perhaps the last chess videos show that I'm going to be doing. But it's up to you. So the one possibility is that I might go to the same kind of for credits approach that Greg Shahadi and I guess some others have occasionally tried too. So if those of you who have liked the show or the shows that I've done over the years are interested in that, please let me know. Make remarks in the comments to this video. Find some way of letting me know, because it's a matter if you're interested whether it's really worth doing or not. So for those of you who are interested, great. Let's climb on board and figure out how exactly we're going to do it. If we'll do really regular shows, or if we'll still be weekly, or whatnot. So your feedback on this is not only welcome. It's really going to decide whether this continues or not. If it doesn't, it's been a great run. I think I've been doing this for something like 6 years for chess videos. And certainly, I have no reason not to want to do an occasional video still for you guys. But in terms of regular weekly videos or something close to that, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, this is it. Unless you guys pull me back in. All right. So as I said, it's up to you. I'll try to offer a little reminder at the end so you guys can go straight to the comments. You won't have a chance to forget, I hope. Anyway, let's go ahead and begin. So as I said, this is a viewer games and questions show, and I think this will have us all caught up unless someone offers a game or video while I'm recording this one. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first one comes from George Hollins, and he submits a game that he played against a fellow named Ian Watson. Pretty decent ratings. So Watson was 22-18. Hollins, who submitted the game, is 19-30. So pretty decent ratings, as I said. And it was a good and interesting game, and could have gone either way. So Hollins had black in this. Let me flip the board around. There we go. And well, let's just have a look at the game. So he messes up the opening a little bit, as he said. But keeps fighting, and really very near the end was even winning. So let's have a look. So knight f3, c5, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, d5, d3, knight f6. First quick comment, I would suggest playing e5. I know that people are often a little bit hesitant to go for reversed openings, to just play them straight, but in this case I think it's pretty decent to do. The King's Indian is a fine opening. It's certainly not a bad opening. Some of the greatest players in history, like Fischer and Kasparov and nowadays Radjabov, have played this with tremendous success. But nevertheless, I don't think the King's Indian is so fantastic that going from a tempo down to a tempo up should all of a sudden give white anything serious. So I think e5 is a perfectly good way to play. Nevertheless, of course, you should play what you're comfortable with. So knight f6, castles. Again, I would go for e5, but e6 was played. All right, knight b to d2, bishop b7, e4. And now we're in basically a King's Indian attack. Well, not basically, it is a King's Indian attack by transposition. All right, lots of systems that black can choose here. Probably castling is the most flexible in one sense, but of course not in another, because you're making your king potentially a target. And black does end up castling sooner or later anyway. The thing with b5 right now is that maybe white can play a4. And I'm not sure that black is situated the way he wants to see this. So it might have been worth preparing this in some way. Okay, so rook e1 was played by white. Again, maybe castling instead, but okay, a5. And here an interesting idea for white is to play ed, and on ed play c4, or perhaps even d4. This is also kind of interesting. Here the idea is to post the knight up on e5, which is not a bad square for it at all. So it's not the usual kind of build up on the king side and try to club black to death approach, but because black has made all of these potentially loosening queenside moves, it's worth considering changing plans with a move like d4 or again, c4, trying to rip open the long diagonal. So be flexible. You don't have to just go for the basic template no matter what. I mean, if black's overextending here or creating new weaknesses, creating new targets, it's absolutely worth looking to see if you can do something a bit different to take advantage. All right, so e5, knight d7. Here, h4 is played. Okay, knight f1 is going to come to the same thing. So h4 is played, castles, knight f1, b4. All right, so we're still in a theoretical position. White played knight 1 to h2, which is a main move. There's also bishop f4, overprotecting e5, with the idea of perhaps playing knight to g5 soon. Still another idea is to play h5, obviously with the idea of playing h6. And if black were to play h6, then you can consider various ideas involving sacrifices on h6. Not right away, naturally, but playing it in the near future. All right, so knight 1 to h2, bishop a6. Again, bishop f4 is playable here. Knight to g4 is playable. Preparing, again, in some cases to, well, after h5, if black plays h6, to sacrifice on h6. And finally, the move in the game is h5. Now, here, as Hollins himself points out in his the little introduction he gave to the game, knight to d4 here was a mistake. So, rather, he expected something a few moves later on. But knight to d4, I think, is just not really, it doesn't really make as much sense when black has played bishop to a6. So there are cases where you should play it or at least consider it. But here I don't think it works so well. Better would be a move like a4. White typically meets a4 in these positions with a3. It's an old trick that goes back to, I believe, Fischer against Miag-Masurin. But also h6 and knight to g4 are quite good as well. But anyway, a4 is kind of the standard idea, trying to break open lines on the queen side as well. All right, knight to d4. So takes, queen g4, threatening bishop h6, king h8. Here, h6 first, I think, is more accurate, and only after g6 to play knight f3. Because after knight f3, black should play h6, I think. So this would have been better. Also, I think queen c7 is more logical than queen to b6. But black had prepared this, and I think, well, actually, he had said that what he expected here was queen takes d4. And then black has some counterplay after bishop to c5. Whether it's enough, I don't know. But there's no real reason for white to rush to take that pawn. It's a weakness, and by taking it, it gives black's pieces a bit more scope. So knight f3 is, I think, more to the point, although, again, h6 right away. Whoops. h6 right away is the more accurate way. All right, so knight f3, queen b6, h6. Here, rook to g8 is interesting. Of course, it's accepting some damage in the structure, but it also enables black's pieces to come over and defend more easily. After g6, it's keeping some lines closed, but it also keeps the bottleneck. So it's much more difficult for black to muster up a full defense. All right, white played bishop to g5. Standard operating procedure here. Trade off the dark squared bishops. Now, especially that black is just full of dark squared weaknesses. Bishop to c5 was the response. Black very naturally is trying to avoid this exchange, but it turns out that he really can't do it. So this proves to be a slight waste of time. Queen f4, king g8, bishop f6, threatening bishop g7, knight g5, and so on. So rook fe8, knight g5, and here, lo and behold, bishop to e7 is forced because bishop to g7 otherwise would just win the exchange at the very least. So the exchange happens anyway. The point being that bishop to g7. Now there's bishop takes g5. Okay, so takes, knight f3, a4, and now knight takes d4. So it's been a successful middle game for white. He's picked up the pawn, but now it starts to get interesting because I think white starts to misplay the position. All right, rook to c8, and here white plays b3, which I think is a rather poor move. White's extra pawn is the c pawn, but once you play b3, it's really difficult to see how this pawn from c2 is going to advance. I mean, it's going to be really challenging. So I think a much better way to play would be a3. Again, in keeping with the old Fischer Masurin template, although really here the concept is different. Here the point is to free the c pawn and to consolidate the queen side. So here, if black plays b3, well, then just takes and rook a to c1, and it looks to me like white's simply a pawn up. Black cannot take on d3 even after swapping rooks because of the weak back rank. So for instance, rook c1, bishop d3, rook c8 check, knight f8, and then queen to f6 with queen to g7 mate next. Okay, instead of b3 then, how about b takes a3? Well, if white had to play ba, maybe it would be okay, although I'm not even sure about that, but rook a3 is just fine. Whenever black takes on b2, white takes on a4 and should be very happy. Knight c5, of course, is impossible, trying to defend the a4 pawn because of queen f6 once again. So let's say something like queen to b4, hitting the rook e to a1. And now there are tricks like knight to f5 and knight c6 that are threatened. So probably nothing better now than queen b2. But after rook a4, white's up a very safe extra pawn. His pieces are better. Black's king is still in hot water. So white is winning. Instead, if a3, white played b3, as I said. And this is a mistake. So a3, queen e3, and now a move that I think illustrates a common error that I think deserves a name. So I'm going to dub this the rook fallacy with rook to c3. And the idea behind the rook fallacy is this. If you have take all the pieces off the board, just have a clean board, and put one piece, whatever piece you want, on the board. So first put it in the corner, then put it anywhere on the edge other than a corner, and then put it in the center. And you'll notice that whatever piece you put, the knight, the bishop, the queen, even the king, for that matter, a pawn being off of an edge, not on the A or H file, also improves by centralizing file-wise. Well, so all four of the pieces that I mentioned, plus the pawns, benefit. So they have more scope on the edge than in the corner. Again, what I mean on the edge, a non-corner edge, and more scope still in the center than on the edge. Except for one piece, the rook. The rook gains absolutely nothing moving from the corner to the middle of the board. It's going to control 14 squares on an empty board no matter what. So the rook fallacy comes when a player treats it kind of like all the other pieces. So generally, if you've got a piece sitting on the back row, if you shove it all the way up towards the opponent's pieces and occupy this hole, it's going to be more fruitful there. But with the rook, it makes absolutely no difference, unless there's something going on laterally. But black is really not going to play bishop takes d3 and then rook takes d3, or even less likely to play something where the rook does something on the b file. So in light of that, the rook on c3 is really a bit silly. It doesn't exert any new horizontal pressure, and in fact, it could get pushed back at some point. Let's say white plays rook a to c1 and knight e2 at some moment. So this is really kind of a counterproductive idea. It's not helping black at all. Now, it doesn't really do much harm here, but it's just an interesting phenomenon that I've noticed this even with pretty decent players. I mean, again, black in this game is a 1900, certainly a very respectable rating, but making kind of a pointless move, really. All right, so rook e2, rook e8, rook a to e1, rook e to c8, f4, knight c5, okay, rook to d1. So white takes a moment to shore up the d3 pawns. There's no sack. But, on the other hand, black has to be careful that he doesn't, fall for knight to e2 trick at some moment either. All right, queen d8, king h2, queen f8. Now, white is still up a safe pawn. I mean, in no danger at all. But, again, thanks to the terrible b3, he's really stymied. How does he go forward? So here, he plays f5. And I think this is a very good idea, although black should still be able to hold on here. But this at least makes the position very dangerous. It turned out that it was white who ended up in more danger than black very soon, though. So e takes f5, bishop d5, rook to d8, very good move. And here, white should have played bishop to c4. But after bishop c4, b c4, Black has a very nice and surprising move, and one that does justify, finally, I think, the rook on c3. So rook takes d4. Knight e6 would be okay. Black would be just a little bit worse there, but this is actually really good. Takes, check. Queen blocking is probably best. Takes, takes. And now knight e6 with the idea of knight to d4. And surprisingly enough, Black seems to be all right here. I mean, White is just basically stuck. So I don't see how White's going to ever break through here. Oops. So in the game, White played e6. This was the idea. Sacrificing the piece, but counting on the e-pawn. But this is a mistake. Now, White could still have held on here with knight to c6. But it's, the hour's getting late here for White. The idea is to play knight takes b4. And, of course, the knight is immune because of e8 queen. So knight to d7, knight takes b4, rook e5. That's the idea of knight to d7. Takes, takes, rook c5. And this is probably best here, too, for White. So it's for Black. So if knight a6, then rook e5 and rook e7. And all of a sudden, the White King's in a bit of trouble. Rook to e2 is coming. Knight e5, knight to g4 is coming. So this is very worrisome for White, despite his extra pawn here. So the right move is rook to e1. And then on rook e5, I think he can just trade. He can just sacrifice. But even if he doesn't, it should be okay. So bishop to b7, saving the bishop. And now d4, stopping rook to e5. And the position is just very unclear. White's got 2 pawns for the piece, but at least two of the pawns are really very good pawns. All right, well, in the game, instead of knight to c6, White played rook to f1, preparing to take on f5. And here Black missed a very clear win. Worse than that, made a move that should have been losing. But I guess, it's a complicated game, and, it's been complicated for a while, so probably both players were in time trouble, and both players start making serious mistakes at this point. So Black should have played knight to e4 right now. That would have been a very nice move, pointed out by Hollins himself. So now knight f5, gf5, queen b6, just as one example. And the simplest here is just rook to c6. Very simple. Queen b4, rook h6 check, king g2, takes, takes, takes. And White is completely lost. He's down a full piece. The e-pawn is not going to promote, and his king is in a lot of trouble. So even if he plays rook f3, I mean, maybe that saves the king, but just takes, takes, rook e6, and the e-pawn drops, and once that goes, there's nothing for White to play for. One way for Black to go wrong, though, is with queen e7, queen a6, and now knight c5. Queen c7 is winning, so this would still win, but it's a little bit too complicated for time trouble chess. So the queens come off and Black's up the rook. But going back to here, so after queen e7, queen a6, knight c5, okay, this is obviously bad. You trade queens, but then there's mate. Anyway, that was unnecessary. So just rook c6 with rook h6, bishop d3, etc. And Black is winning very easily. You have to get there, that's the problem. Alright, so knight takes d3 was played, and here White can just play cd. And clearly what Black missed was that after rook takes d3, White does have a route to g7 with queen to g5, and then queen f6, and so on. And Black is lost here. But Black got a second chance. White played the immediate queen to g5. And here Black played rook to d6, which lost. He could have played knight to e5 instead. Sneaky defense. So first of all, if queen f6, there's knight to g4 check. So that takes care of that. And if rook takes e5, now it's at least not obvious at first sight what Black can do about the threat. But surprisingly, rook takes d4 is just fine. Here's the idea. And it's complicated. Again, in time trouble, you can try it, you can hope it works, but it's not going to be possible to calculate all of this. So rook to d2 check. Now, if the king comes up, it's easy. Takes, rook to d4, rook to g4 mate. But White can play a Novotny here, to use the term from problem composition. The idea being that, of course, if the bishop takes, well, it's not check anymore, and White just plays queen g7 mate. While after rook takes, well, now king h3, there's no bishop takes f1 check. Very clever. So again, it looks like white's about to win. Unfortunately for him, black has rook takes g3 check, king g3, queen to b8 check, rook f4, rook e3 check, king g2, queen a8 check, and eventually these checks are going to come to a very happy end for black, not for white. White could try instead rook e takes f5, but black will survive this one too. So yeah, not this check, because after this block, there's no defense. So you could take on f3 with either piece, but ultimately e8 queen will finish the job. So queen f3, rook f3, e8 queen is mate. But bishop to g2 check is a winner. If king h2, then bishop to e4 check, and then king h3, bishop takes f5 check, and so on. Or if king g1, rook d1, king h2, rook h1, and now there's no more pawn and no more mate. There is still the e pawn though, but what will end up happening is that white will win black's queen, but with 2 rooks and 2 pawns for the queen, black should win. Alright, so that was quite complicated, and again, in time trouble, it's very difficult. So black played rook to d6, natural move, stopping queen f6, but after knight takes f5, white's winning. No doubt what was missed was that after rook d to c6, it's not just queen to g7 that black has to worry about. Knight to g7 is another dirty trick, and this is going to win big material because, well, when the queen moves, e8 queen happens. Alright, black tried rook 3 to c5 as a last trick, but knight e8, rook g5, and then knight f6 check was the end. e8 queen mate is next, so black gave up. So a very interesting game. You know, some good lessons there, I think, for both sides. But, you know, kind of a pity for black. I mean, he fought back from a lost position, held on well. But in the complications, both sides made mistakes, and black made the last one. All right, so let's move on to our next game here. And this is between Larson, not Bent, and a player whose name is Base M, or his handle was Base M. So this is from the Game 10, although I'm really surprised if this is Game 10. I mean, this is some pretty impressive play for Game 10, played on a server called chessjam.com. All right, so Larson is the guy who submitted it. His rating on that server is 2119. White's rating on the server is 2606, so pretty decent player. You know, I don't know what their inflation numbers are, if any. I mean, on ICC, 2606 is, generally speaking, in the Blitz category, like a decent master rating. Sometimes even IMs will be there, although it's a little low for many IMs, although you see them there. Anyway, moving on, d4, e6, and then by transposition we reach the winnower, and then white plays this exchange line. Here I think white is slightly inaccurate with a3. It's I think better to play bishop to d3 first, because after a3 takes, black can immediately flick out bishop to f5 and instantly solve the problem of the bad bishop. Okay, it's not such a bad bishop in general anyway. I mean, black has other options for it, but that's why bishop to d3 is considered to be the more accurate move back here. You can always play a3 next. All right, so we get to this position, and here I would again take care of the bishop at my earliest convenience with bishop to g4. If he plays f3, I'll play bishop h5, g6. Otherwise, I might just leave it there, or I might play queen d7 and bishop to f5. There are quite a few ways of dealing with this, or I may end up just taking on e2, depending on what goes on. All right, so black castled, knight e2. Again, I would probably opt for bishop to g4, but c5 is fine. Nothing wrong with this. And now d takes c5, and this is a very good move. This makes sure that both of white's bishops will be able to participate. And although obviously white's queenside pawn structure is not ideal, it's not that easy to get to those pawns for quite a while. I mean, the c5 pawn will drop, but the c3, c2, a3 pawns are not that easy to reach. And the benefit that white gets by keeping the bishops very much alive and getting access to the d4 square too, I think this certainly justifies it. I would offer a slight comparison, going back to the beginning here. to the variation in the Nimzo-Indian with the F3 Samish line. So it goes like this. Takes, takes, and then D takes C5. I mean, this looks just horrific from a pawn structure point of view. I mean, you might think, if you had never seen this line before, that white was just a very weak player. Really weak player. But this is actually a very serious line. And again, the idea is similar. White is going to have access to some very important dark squares. D4 for sure, sometimes D6. And it makes sure that white, again, will be able to use both bishops, including his extra one, the dark square bishop, which in many Nimzo-Indian lines is a problem piece. All right, so let's get back to the game. So D takes C5. All right, Larsen plays knight B to D7. There's one earlier game in this variation. Dvoris against Eingorn, a couple of pretty decent grandmasters. And so in that game went castles, knight C5, bishop G5, and just kind of cursor through it quickly so you get some idea of how the players dispose their forces. So both sides have reasonable development. White picks up a pawn here, but with the weaknesses on the queen side, black still has pretty decent chances to hold. So then there was this little tactical sequence here, concluding in this ending. And now I think white has fair chances. I mean, not a huge advantage by any means, but certainly has something to play for. And he did and eventually won in the ending. All right, so in our game, base M played bishop to E3, queen E7, castles, knight C5, so there's the pawn back. But again, both sides are getting decent development. All right, here black played bishop to H5. Maybe he could have just taken on E2 straight away. But he went here, and only after queen B1, then took. I don't know that black was really trying to be clever, thinking that, well, if I take right away, white plays queen takes E2. Maybe he thought that, but I think the immediate bishop takes E2 would have been an improvement. Anyway, from here, it seems to me as if white is now doing a bit better. So his bishops are pretty good. The bishop on D4 in particular is very good. And he's able to get his his major pieces a little bit more into play, a little bit more quickly than black. So it's not a lot yet, but it's a little something. Now here I'd probably play A6 as well, because I want to fight for the E file. I don't want to give white the chance to grab this. All right, well, knight F to E4 is not bad. Here, queen C6, C4, takes and takes. And now I would say it's certain that white has the edge. The queen side structure really doesn't matter very much anymore. What matters are the bishops, and you can see that whites are beautiful here. I mean, he's hitting G7. The bishop on C4 looks quite nice as well. So as long as there's no real pressure against C2, and the rook on E2 helps to make sure that there isn't, white's always going to have a pull. And it's just a matter of whether it's going to become a big deal or not. So here we have exchange, and at least one of the bishops was eliminated. But still, the bishop on D4 is better than the knight on A4. Now, here, B5 would be a very good move, except that it loses on the spot. Queen G3, if F6, rook E7, if G6, queen E5, it's all a disaster. So, black correctly played queen B3, CB, and here I think knight C3 would have been more accurate. So, of course, he's got to move the knight somewhere. He chose C5, but I think knight C3 is better, because now, if bishop takes, then, of course, the rook is immediately recapturing with a hit on the B3 pawn. So let's say rook E7 instead. Well, B6, and, okay, now if takes, rook A to E1, G6, rook B7, rook B3, and this, I think, is a much better version of the game from black's point of view, and really has to be a draw. There's this just should not be a win for white at all. All right, white still has a little pull, but nothing too serious. Okay, after knight C5 takes, rook E7, rook B5, rook A to E1. Another important little moment. Here, black played H5, which is not awful at all. But I would prefer G6. So this also takes care of the back rank, but it, if there comes a back rank check, the king can come to G7. And I suppose what maybe Black was worried about was that White might take time out at some moment to play G4 and prevent Black from getting the ideal kingside defensive setup with the pawns on H5, G6, and F7. But I think for now it's better to keep the structure compact rather than to play H5. It's also possible to play Rook F8, but a move that should not be played is King F8, because obviously after Rook C7, Rook E to E7 is going to be an even bigger problem. All right, so H5, and now a very good move, Rook 1 to E3. Not B4. If you play B4, then simply A5 and mass liquidations will transpire. But Rook 1 to E3 was a very good move. And it comes just in time, because Black would like to have played B6 and then Rook to F5, but here Rook to F5 drops the B pawn while B6 is too slow. Okay, maybe though A5 is a good move to fix the pawn in place, and A6 isn't bad either, just to minimize the buffet. So instead he played Rook to D8, Rook F3, and now a move that I think is definitely inaccurate, F6. Okay, so Rook F8 is safer and better. It's unpleasant. You don't want to make a move like this, so I fully understand it psychologically. It stinks to put your rook on F8 where it's doing absolutely nothing, especially when it was just on an open file. But what Black really can't afford to do is to clear out the 7th rank. Well, there may be positions where you can do it, but it's very risky. I mean, this is much, much more secure. So F6, Rook C3, and again, the same point. Here, I think, instead of G5, or no, sorry, G5, yeah, it's the same problem. It keeps the pawn safe, but it ensures unending grief for the Black king. So B4, and yeah, now instead of King F8, I would prefer A5. So takes. Here, let's say Rook C to C7, Rook A3, check. Okay, obviously White is having the fun here, but this is really not going to be very easy to win because F6 and G5 are going to be quite secure, and if a pair of rooks are traded, then it's a draw. So, White is really going to have to be very patient and try to find ways of weakening the Black position further before a win becomes even remotely possible. All right, so instead King F8, and now it looks like the momentum is certainly in White's favor. Probably he's winning. Yeah, so threatening mate again, threatening mate again. This is a very good move. Again, this is the accuracy in this game is startling for game 10. I mean, if this was game in 10 hours or game in 10 days, then I would expect this. But my best games on ICC, maybe I play this well, maybe, but I don't know. I mean, this was pretty well done by both players. Certainly, Black could have played the rook ending a bit better, but no real serious mistakes. I mean, in a very complicated position. Okay, so anyway, from here, yeah, Black played Rook F7. If Rook F2, then check, takes, and just this is going to be winning. So with the 2 extra pawns on the king side, White will win. All right, so in the game he played Rook F7, and again, just too many pawns. It's down 2 pawns, and the 3-0 kingside majority is going to win the game. And this was a nice little touch too, B5, and Black resigned here. And he commented that this game was one of his favorites, even though he lost, that he enjoyed it a lot. And I would say, yeah, I mean, both guys played really well. So, definitely not a game to feel even slightly ashamed of. It was well played and instructive. Okay, whoops. Okay, on to the next one. So this one was, again, it was Black who submitted the game. So it's Pierre-Antoine Deschamps who had Black against Clément Meunier. So hopefully didn't butcher that too badly. So both these guys are pretty good. White was like 1965, Black 2082. I believe it's a tournament game. And a very exciting one. I think quite a bit or many improvements were possible, but really a very lively and interesting game. So let's jump in. Okay, so again, our side is Black. And here he played F5, which is aggressive but potentially weakening. Although I would say, if you're going to play this kind of setup, play it against an E3 English rather than a G3 English. So G3 English, I don't really like it as much. All right, so here White played D3. d4 is generally the main move here. Understandably so. Black, at least at this point, doesn't really want the center to open, having played f5. So this, I think, would be the principled way to try to meet this. All right, so d3 is not bad, but it's just modest. Okay, g3. Here, we're already in pretty untrodden territory. There was one earlier game between a couple of good players, Monokroussos and Monokroussos, in a game played in Vladimir 2002. And there, White went for a plan that I think is the correct plan, at least as far as the queen side goes. So played bishop to e2, a3, and then rook b1 and b4. So this, I think, is kind of the typical way to go in such a structure. Because White really, I mean, once he forsook the moment for d4, and you always have to be careful about d4 too, especially if it's not opening the center anymore, because Black plays e4 and then starts trying to do bad things to you over on the king side. So this is a kind of a good, safe way to try to keep control. Black, of course, is going for loaded for bear over on the king side, and White is hoping that he can break in the center. And in this game, he succeeded, and his queenside counterplay ended up winning the game. All right, so in our game, though, Munir played g3, which was a novelty. Of course, it gets to a very standard kind of position, but with the pawn on e3 not really fitting. So here, for example, if White could play bishop to g5, that would be pretty typical. You play bishop to g5, swap when you're forced to on f6, you play the knight to d2, knight comes to d5, and White's got a very nice control over the light squares. But here, of course, you can still play knight to d2, your bishop and knight are still hitting d5, but the bishop on c1 doesn't really fit in, and the knight on f6 survives to fight for the d5 square. All right, here I would say the way to go would be a castle, and again, go for some a3, rook b1, b4, knight d5 action. Instead, White played bishop to d2. Again, kind of a half a move. I mean, it's not really the most testing way to handle the position. All right, Black just calmly played d6, knight to d5. And here maybe e4 is the best move, taking advantage of, well, White's really kind of overly quiet play, and maybe in some position, or in some variations, taking advantage of the pawn on b2 being loose, like if knight f6, obviously when you take, and fe4 or d4, fe4, and you can take on b2. Okay. Anyway, this didn't happen. So it was knight d5, cd5, knight e7, e4, and now White's not in such bad shape. It's a funny position because the bishop on g2. Earlier, we were thinking of ways to try to make this a very useful piece, and here it looks kind of sad. But there are still cases where it can come into the game. Via, let's say, h3 in some cases, and it's not impossible that the center will open up to some extent either. So it's a bad bishop for now, but it need not stay that way. All right, Black played h6, keeping White's minors off of g5, especially perhaps the knight. Yeah, well, that would be an example. Knight g5 and knight e6, bishop takes e6, d6, and then a subsequent e takes f5, and lo and behold, the bishop on g2 is right back into the action. So h6 stops that, but now h4 is a very sensible move with the idea of h5 undermining the f5 pawn, so then you can play e takes f5 perhaps at some point, and then the bishop, or maybe in the knight, various white pieces can use the e4 square. Nevertheless, it might have been even better to play b4 and immediately hit at the black structure. If he takes, then bishop takes b4, and the pressure on d6 is a nice boon. If Black doesn't do anything, if he just leaves the status quo, then after b takes c5, if Black plays dc, well then the e5 pawn might be slightly weakened, and White's d5 pawn is a protected passer. So that leaves finally b6, and that might be the best way to go, but that may also leave some little gaps as well. Maybe c6 someday could turn out to be a square that Black would have to be careful about, that White can occupy. So b4 might be best. Anyway, h4, maybe castling, but okay, bishop to d7, a4, b6. Yeah, and here, I mean, the bishop on d7 is not really well posted. I mean, the idea of bishop to d7 was to play bishop to b5, which is a good idea, but maybe the best way to do it would be a castle, play b6, with the idea of bishop to a6. Anyway, here, a4, b6, and now it'd be nice to have the bishop back on c8. Alright, queen c1, a6, bishop f1. I think white should just castle and should stand better. Bishop f1 just strikes me as really peculiar. Yeah, I mean, the bishop is not well placed on e2. Alright, so b5, and now another, I think, rather poor move by white, a5. This doesn't give white anything. I mean, white, I guess he's afraid of, I suppose it's just by a process of elimination that he came to this move. He thinks, okay, well, black is starting to take the pawn. If I trade on b5, then maybe black will be able to overwhelm me on the a file, because after he castles, he'll get there first, although maybe it'll be a tie. Castles, bishop b2. Okay, in other words, a b, bishop b2, castles, castles. So, yeah, both sides have equal rights to the a file at that point. But I think the best way to go would just be b3. So there's no need to cede anything here. So that would be my preference. Anyway, after a5, now white no longer has any options of using the a file, but black still gets what he wants. In fact, with b4, now the bishop can come to b5 because white has given away that square. All right, here I think a good idea, well, it's even better next move, so let's look at it there. So bishop b2, bishop b5, and here I think white should try to plug up the gap. I mean, his minor pieces are by and large looking pretty feeble at this moment. So I think the way to go here is bishop to e3, and then knight to d2, with the idea of knight c4. So now the knight is very good, the d-pawn is safe, and maybe the lion's not lying down with the lamb just yet, but white really has very little to worry about in this position. He's doing quite well. The knight's great if it survives. If it doesn't survive, well, white is fixing his pawn structure, and then he can take on f5 if he wants to at some point without worrying about the fate of the d5 pawn. So this would have been the way to go. Instead, he plays h5, so he starts really trying to mix things up here. So g5, and now knight takes g5, pushing the panic button. It turns out to be extremely exciting, but objectively it's not very good. So hg, bishop g5. Here black played queen d7, which is not bad. Maybe king in d7 is even better, though. The king gets out of danger, the heavy pieces are connected, and now there's a nice open pipeline on the 8th rank for black to shuttle his forces over to the king side. So queen d7, h6, castles, rook h5. So now white does threaten to take on g7. So bishop f8. Here, maybe bishop to f6 is best. And on rook h7, queen g5, bringing everybody over. Maybe black should play something like king to b7, just consolidating the queen side. But, well, white has some compensation, so it's probably not full compensation for the piece. He's got 2 pawns, but I think eventually black should be able to unravel and win this. But it's still a lot of work. All right, in the game, white played e takes f5, and here black played very well. Rook e8 was a good move, threatening to take something with the knight next. So white played bishop takes e7. It's understandable, but maybe f6 was better. And then on knight takes d5, just something like rook to h4, with the idea of bishop to g4, also in some cases to play bishop h5. And black is still better, but white's, but white has some real possibilities here. Another idea too is if the knight were to retreat somehow, maybe goes to, well, no, never mind that. I was trying to find some way to make a rook takes b4 idea work. Maybe there's going to be some position where that will happen, taking advantage of the pin on the c file. But for now, anyway, there's nothing immediate except for bishop to g4. But it's dangerous. Anyway, bishop takes e7 was definitely a favor to black. That bishop was quite good. It was a very active piece. It was supporting the h6 pawn. So I think surrendering it was a real mistake. All right, queen e7 was played. Rook e7 might be even better, threatening to double and then just win the h-pawn. So g4, rook over, g5. But now there's queen takes f5. And now black should just be winning here. d3 is weak, and the pawns are blockaded. All right, instead queen e7 happened, which is not bad either. Okay, g4. And here, it would have been better to play e4 right away. So this would have been very strong. White has to keep this line closed with d4. Okay, but now e3, threatening to take on f2 and then take on e2. So f3. But now, the queen on c1 no longer protects the h-pawn. So, rook h6, and now white has almost no compensation for the piece. I mean, he's got two pawns, but his king is in trouble. The pawn on e3 is a monster. This is just over. All right, so black instead played queen f6. Here, white should have played g5 and then queen e3. Black is still, of course, better. Black's going to be better probably almost no matter what, but this is at least kind of keeping things together for white. Instead, he played queen to e3 immediately, and now black correctly played e4, and here he missed a win. So c takes d4 would be a blunder because of queen c1 check, and then a6. Now there's the threat of a7 and then queen to c6, and it's a disaster. But instead of that, the best move would have been bishop takes h6. So a little tricky business here. Obviously, it's sufficiently protected. The question is, what about g5? And the answer is, who cares? Bishop takes g5. Because, well, if rook g5, rook h1, and the bishop on b5 is there, so bishop f1 doesn't help. And likewise, if queen g5, you just trade queens and then play, again, rook h1, win the rook on a1, and it's just it's a done deal. Instead, white caught another break with bishop takes e2. Okay, king b7 protecting a6. So now white has managed to kind of reload here. So he's got a new batch of play. So even though the king side is really under control, there's a little bit of mess over on the queen side too that he's got to be careful about. All right, here the best would have been rook takes h6, with the idea that on g5 there's rook takes h5. So if g takes f6, then there's rook h1 check, followed by bishop h6, completely winning. And if queen takes h5, then just queen e5, or queen takes b2, and black is doing very well. All right, instead though, black played queen e5 here, queen d2. Again, this was a good chance for e3. Yeah, and this is just winning. So one variation that I calculated, not the computer, I did this, was bishop h6, g5, bishop g5, rook h1, rook g5, rook h1, king f2, rook h2, rook g2, rook g8, rook c to g1, queen f5, king e1, queen b1, king f2. Okay, and then my variation was just this, queen g1, and then just trading everything off, c4, c3, and b3 winning. So it's a pretty good bit of analysis. The computer does, of course, have one thing to say, which is that here, instead of my big simplification and promotion idea, rook f8 is much easier. Well, it's much faster because there's a mate. On king e2, you just swap rooks, and then queen f1 is mate. Or if king g3, check, and rook h8 is mate. So that's nice and elegant, but okay. My approach works too. So the bottom line is that black is winning with e3. Easy for me to find in the comfort of my study, not so easy to find with the clock ticking, and after calculating and calculating and calculating for several hours before getting to this point. All right, so in the game, black played rook to d8. Understandable move. Trying to round up this pawn. Okay, rook to d1, rook h7, queen g5. Here, probably it would have been better to play rook d to d7, but rook h to d7 is natural. I mean, you're going after the d5 pawn, but you're going to be a little scared about the h pawn too. All right, here white should have played f6, and this, I think, gives white equality. All right, but this is all ridiculously complicated. Okay, just give one line. And something like this, and this probably should be a draw. All right, in the game, it's queen g6, threatening queen c6, threatening queen b6, even more. So rook to d6 was played. Bishop to d6 might be better, but okay, this is all right. Here, f6 should be played, but queen f7. Here, this should have been played, and then on queen f8, rook to d5. We'll see. There's a, oh no, sorry. Yeah, this would have been best. The game is bishop b7, h7. Here, king to b8 would have been best, but this is a move that, again, only the computer's going to quickly find. Looks strange to put your king on the back rank when h8 is always lurking about. So e3 is really natural, but here's the thing. With h8 queen, white wins. Takes here. Okay, now let's say you grab all of this. Queen e7 is checked. So that's why it was important to put the king on b8. It, in fact, ends up avoiding checks rather than allowing this one. All right, we're queen to e4, then give up this queen. And white is winning here, although not as game-endingly as in the last variation. All right, instead, white played f4. Objectively, this is a blunder, but again, a very natural move to make. Queen f4 takes. And here, an unusual vertical case of the wrong rook. So it's, the idea of the wrong rook is famous. Do you put, let's say, you've got the open files in the center. Do you put the rook on e1 or e8 or d8, or do you put a rook on the c file? What do you do? Which rook goes where? Well, it's unusual for it to be a vertical question, but here it was. So in the game, black played this rook to d7. Should have put the other rook, and we'll see why. Queen h4, e2, king e2, and here, okay, if you put the rook on d6, as happens in the game, there's no check on the e file. The pawns cover e6, the queen covers e7, but here there's rook to e8 check. And now after king d3, rook d5, king c2, queen c4, there's finally rook takes d1 mate. All right, so this is all just complications here. Rook here, queen h4, e2 takes. Okay, again, another mistake, but again, who can blame these guys? So queen e4 check first was right, and then rook takes. Because now there's no queen check, and in fact, white has to work to save the game with either queen to g5 to stop rook to d2, or the very clever queen h1, so that after rook to d2 check, king goes somewhere. There's no, well, somewhere. King to g3 is forced. There's no queen check because of the pin on the diagonal. So rook takes d5 allowed queen e7 check. So here, and now queen to e3 would have been winning. So queen g4 check, queen f3 is check. Queens come off, and the h pawn decides. All right. So in the game, white played queen d6. The last mistake. Black is able to force perpetual here. And in fact, white should not play king c4 because of queen to d5 mate. So in the game, he just went here, and the draw was agreed since obviously black's queen can go back and forth from a4 to d1 forever. All right, crazy, crazy game. Very, very entertaining and very enjoyable. Let's move on to the next one. So this, once again, has the submitter on the black side. So this was a chess.com thematic tournament. I don't know what the time controls were. So black was, as I said, the person who submitted this, Zip Vono or Exit Vono. White was Webco, and both these guys were rated, at least on chess.com ratings, just a bit under 2,000. So as a thematic game, they were forced to play this position. My condolences to black. I'm just kidding. I play this sometimes with black. Not always, I think less and less, but off and on over the years, I've been fond of this, as those of you who've watched my shows over the years will know. So takes. Of course, c takes d4 is a fun way to blunder a pawn, I say with tongue-in-cheek, but e takes d5 was what was played here. And, okay, all of this is kind of normal. Generally, the players will have castled before bishop to g5. But, okay, bishop g5. And I'll just note that c4 is all the rage these days, at least when both sides have castled, thanks to the book that came out earlier this year by Agard and Natirlis. Maybe it was late last year. I think it was this year, though. Anyway, they recommend c4. And there are a number of very good players who play this. Varuj Jacobian, for those of you who are familiar with him, well-known American grandmaster, has been a big fan of this system for many years. In fact, he had the bad manners to beat me with it back in an interesting game in, I think, 2009. So that kind of rekindled my interest in the Tarrasch. I mean, I used to play the Tarrasch, but I would play the c takes d4 lines when I wasn't blundering the pawn back on move 4. And that's what happened in our game, too. But c4 is chosen by Jacobian. Nowadays, after having really looked at it a lot, I think if white knows what he's doing, black just gets an unpleasant endgame that he has to defend forever. But there are a lot of positions where black can get interesting play. So it's a line worth adding into your bag of tricks, especially if you play the Tarash anyway. All right, so CD4, Knight D4, and here I would again play just castles to get back to the main line with H6. Okay, well, black played Queen to B6, and there's a similar position in which this isn't considered to be very good, with Rubinstein Solvay from Lodz in 1908 being really just a classic beatdown, illustrating black's problems in the variation. So let's in fact have a look at that game. So that game deviated from this point. So Solvay played CD4, and now Queen B6. So Rubinstein swaps, castles, and now gets about the business of achieving an absolute bind on the dark squares, D4 and C5. So if white can really grab full control over those two squares, then unless black has something really nice as compensation, he's just going to have a really miserable time. So let's see how it went. So Knight A4, Queen B5, Bishop E3, and C5 isn't playable because Knight C3 and then Knight takes D5 is going to be a disaster for black positionally. So just castled, Rook C1, Bishop G4, F3. F3 looks a little bit funny, but this works out really well. White comes up with a very nice way of remaneuvering his kingside pieces that takes full advantage of this move. Okay, so the bishop went back to E6. Now Bishop C5. This is, again, just color by numbers chess, but it's color by numbers thanks to people like Rubinstein who showed us the way. White is going to trade off the dark squared bishops because black's got weak dark squares. So when your opponent has a weak color complex, dark squares, light squares, whatever, it's often a great thing, if you can do it, to swap off that bishop, the bishop that would defend those squares. So Rook F to E8, and now here comes the remaneuver. Rook F2. Knight D7, okay, takes. All right, black is threatening to play C5, so Queen D4. Do not allow this. Rook E to E8, Bishop F1. So there's part 2 of the remaneuver. Rook E to C8, again, threatening to play C5. Well, we stop at first, E3. And after Queen to B7, now Knight C5. So no C5 for you. And now that E3 has been played, not only is the bishop on F1 in the game, but the rook from F2 is ready to slide over to the C file. So takes, Rook C7, Rook F to C2. Now, here, black maybe has his last chance. I think he can still do it. Really needs to play A5 so he can still have a little gulp of air in the position. Once he plays Queen to B6 and now B4, it's over. So the rest of this is just going to be absolute misery. But that A5 idea is very important. So in these hanging pawn structures, okay, white's already gotten much more than, or has already gotten an awful lot. But if black plays A5, I mean, it at least prevents white from having just a complete 100% clamp. So that grabs a little bit of space and helps to make sure that there's always going to be at least a little bit of counter pressure against white's B pawn. After Queen B6, B4, that pressure is just done. Rook A5, A3, black has nothing. A6 is weak, C6 is weak, and if C6 ever falls, D5 is going to fall too. So here, Solvay blundered with Rook to A7, but already he's in huge trouble. So Rook C6, Queen C6, Queen A7. So that pawn's gone, A6 is weak, and Rubinstein just mops up from here. So just some nice little prophylactic moves. Make sure that nothing bad's going to happen on the king side. Now he's got a protected passer. Well, it's not protected by the pawn, but it's protected by other pieces and just devastatingly strong. Finally, B7, and the threat is Rook to C8. And if black plays King to G7, well, then Rook takes F7 check and Queen takes Queen. So Solvay threw in the towel at this point. All right, so let's go back to our game with Queen to B6. So white tries to get that, but the position isn't quite as favorable as the Rubinstein game. All right, so from here, Queen to D2, castles, and now an interesting move. I didn't like it so much at first, but I have to say it's not that bad. It's a playable move. Bishop to A6. The reason I didn't like it is because I was hesitant about blocking the A pawn for the reasons that we saw in the Rubinstein solving game. But this bishop does exert a little bit of pressure, and so I don't think this is a mistake. I don't think it's best, but I wouldn't call it a mistake. Here, I think white should play bishop to e3. So getting on with the Rubinstein plan. Rook f to d1 is also possible. Against this, I think black should play rook a to d8. But if he tries knight to g4, then I think this is too clever by half. Bishop takes e7, knight f2. Now, of course, not bishop f8 because of smothered mate. Like that. But instead, just queen to d4. Knight takes, rook takes, and white has excellent chances here. So it's a bishop and a knight for a rook and a pawn, but in most positions of this nature, the minor pieces are going to dominate the rook and the pawn. I mean, black has no passed pawn. His rooks have no real targets, so clearly white should be better here. All right, instead white played a3. Here, d4 is interesting, but probably white is, well, I'm not sure that white is better. I mean, white has trumps in the position, but black's bishops are not without value here. But black's move, I think, is right. Rook f to e8, rook a to c1, rook a to d8, queen c2, h6, bishop f4. Here, though, I think black makes a genuine positional error. It's not a blunder, but it is an error, I think, an inaccuracy at least. Played bishop to d6. Again, given that white's plan, his whole major plan, is to clamp down on the dark squares if he possibly can, black should not be in any big rush to trade off his dark squared bishop. So I think the better move would have been bishop to c4, especially since this really highlights the value of this light squared guy. You can put it on b3 in some positions. He's ready to play a5, and here I think black is even slightly better, thanks to white's rather lax play, especially with a3. All right, so bishop to d6, takes, and now, of course, I would play knight to a4 and get on with that. So rook f to e1 makes sense, protecting the e2 pawn. He wants to play e3, but there's a tactical problem, which is that black could play knight to g4 here. So, activity. You can't play the Tarsh without it. And what is white to do? I mean, if he plays rook f1, then I guess maybe d4, but even just in general, I mean, he's going in the wrong direction. If he plays e3, then there's knight e5 for one thing. Maybe in some positions d4, but certainly knight e5 looks a little bit awkward. So white got a break. Black played rook d to e6, now e3, and now there's no targets. So white is consolidated in the center and is ready to play knight a4, c5. Perhaps with that in mind, black played knight to e4, but this too is not fantastic. So here, he should have traded and played knight to a4. I think that would have been the most accurate. Or, I'm sorry, that wouldn't have been the most accurate. What white did was right. So he played knight to a4 immediately. Queen a5 was not good because it gives him a useful tempo here, so b4. And now black really needed to play queen to b5. So now takes, knight c5, rook g6, rook e to d1. Strategically, black's position is really pretty bad. But there's always still at least a little bit of hope. Maybe he can scare something up over on the king side. And even if he loses his queen side down the road, white has to be careful about all those gappy light squares around his king. Instead, black played queen to c7, and this just costs him material. So takes, knight c5, and now there's really just not much to compensate. If he plays rook c4, then still knight a6. And that's winning. So in the game was bishop c4, takes, and okay, the rest of the game, there's maybe some, a few little inaccuracies, but more or less, white is just winning by force here. And so in the interest of time and making this video not go for 2.5 hours, let's go ahead and move on to the next game. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. So here we go. This is, once again, I don't know, maybe all the games are like this. So I guess this is 5 for 5, where the person submitting the game had black. So this is not Kino against Flatman, also known as Chris Falter. Both these guys are low 1900s on fix, and it was a standard game. So here we're going to jump right to this endgame position, and me read what Chris said in his notes. So he said, in spite of overlooking some winning tactical shots, I managed to reach what I think was a winning minor piece endgame. Remember, he was black. I would appreciate your evaluation of the endgame after White's 34th move, and also any tips about how I could have collected the point with less drama. I do think the mutual Zugzwang to finish off is a nice touch, in spite of all my previous efforts to give away the half point. Okay, well, I would agree. I think at this point, black should win. So he's up a pawn. He has a passer, which is an outside passer, which is a big asset because that, of course, draws the enemy defenders away from everybody else, which is always a nice thing. And, you've got the superior minor piece, the bishop versus the knight, and there's the chance to create a second passer in the center. So, White just has the one majority, but he'd probably be better off if he didn't. Like if you stuck the G4 pawn over on B3, it would probably be a lot harder to win. So this, I think, should be fairly straightforward. Not trivial, but should definitely be done. And the first move, I think, is pretty good with B5. One thing you might think, well, why not put the king all the way in the center? But the problem is that you can't really gain any grounds. Like here, if you play that, then knight to E1, followed by knight F3. And the king can't either break through on the king side or really stably stay on E5. So B5, I think, is a very good move. Grabbing some space there and already beginning the process of tying White's pieces down. So king D3. Black played king to D7, which is fine. I kind of like B4. So what I'm thinking is, okay, White wants to play E4. And we can stop that by playing B4. So here, if E4, then B3. Let's say knight E1, and here you can either play the finessed bishop to B4, or just D takes E4. Because if king E4, B2, and you queen, and if king C3, you have this little trick with bishop to B4 check. Okay, obviously White doesn't have to be that cooperative. After B4, he can play knight to A1. All right, and that's how the game can go. So here, something like this, but now in comes the black king. White can't get to black's pawns on the queen side, at least not any time in the near future. So this is going to be a very easy win for black. So I think B4 is the most accurate move. But king D7 is okay. All right, so here, probably knight A1 is the best way to defend. So we set up this little fortress over here. And again, White is going to lose in the long run, I'm pretty sure. But still, it's you can put up resistance. The thing to note, by the way, is that White doesn't necessarily want to play E4 until black plays E5. Because if you play E4 here, then black plays king E5 and recaptures on D5 with the pawn, and the king's ready to jump into F4. So that's why you need the king on the pawn on E3, as long as king to F4 is a possibility in the near future. But once black has played E5, well, then it's not. So then E4 is terrific, and then it's really not very clear, how exactly black is going to break in. Probably he can do it, but it's going to take some real effort. It's going to be a lot harder. So black should not play E5. Anyway, E4, king D6. So a very good move. And now the king can just come to F4. Game over. Knight A1, king E5, ED. But now black starts to go astray. If he just plays E takes D5, I think it's going to be very, very simple. So the pawn on D5 keeps the white king completely locked in. And black just plays king F4, king G3, and it's going to be 3 pawns up. Knight to B3, no big deal. Bishop to B6. If knight to D4, of course, when the black king is on F4, then you just trade and play B4, and White can never make any progress grabbing the pawns. Well, let me demonstrate this. Okay, so let's say here, H4. Well, I don't want to play H4. I'm trying to just find some way of wasting time here. Okay, here. All right, let's say. Okay, this is really not what I wanted, but just to illustrate the point. Takes, and now you play B4. So the pawns are self-protecting. If White takes, then the B pawn runs in, and if he tries to run around like this, whenever he does that, you play D4. And now when he goes towards one pawn, you push the other one. So king B3, D3, etc. All right. So in the game, unfortunately, black played king takes D5, and I think this is a step in the wrong direction. All right, knight B3. Okay, everything is good here. Bishop e6 is good. Bishop e7 followed by bishop to f6. The reason why bishop e7 is nice is that it prevents the white pawns from ever advancing. Not that that's a real danger, but the more control you keep, the better. The move played in the game is okay, bishop f2. So knight to d2. Here, maybe b4. Okay, bishop h4. This is all fine. Here, though, I think e5 is best. All right, we want to play e4 check, drive the king back, and then our king can come over towards the b pawn, play king c4, and so on. So let's say knight to d2. Well, now b4, and white's in Zugzwang. If he retreats the king, we go forward. Well, if he plays king to e2, that is, we play e4. If he plays king e3, we play bishop g5 check. If he moves the knight, we have e4 check. If he pushes g5, of course, we just take the pawn. So this is easy. All right, so bishop f6, knight d2, b4, knight b3. And again, just bishop to g5 is Zugzwang. Next, we play e5, e4. Easy, easy, easy win. Okay, bishop g7. Right here, maybe h4, but okay, knight a5. And now black just loses his mind here for a moment, which can happen in a long game. And he plays king to e5. So again, e5, e4. If you'd wanted to play the king to f4, it would have been best to have just done this many, many, many moves ago with the pawn, by recapturing with the pawn on d5. So here he plays this, blundering the pawn, and now it's just a draw. However, the adventures are not over. So king g3, king e4, king h3, king f3. So this should be drawn, in large part because all white has to do is to sacrifice his knight for the e-pawn. And he can lose everything else as long as his king gets to the corner, because we've got the bishop plus wrong-colored rook pawn combination. So if you've got a h-pawn or a rook pawn that queens on a light square, if your bishop is on a dark square, you can't win as long as the enemy king can control the queening square. All you can do is get stalemate. So knight to d3, king g5. And now, for instance, knight c5 is fine. So e5, knight e4 check, king h4, g5. Okay, this is just one drawing line of many. Okay, if bishop d6, knight takes e5, or if e4, this is a dead draw. All right, but there's going to be plenty of dead draws in what we're going to see. So here, knight f4. Okay, here, okay, e5 should be played. So knight to d3, e4 check, takes. So this at least is a little bit tricky, because the white king is cut off, and so he has to make sure that his knight doesn't get Zugzwang. But I think he can just play something like this and hold. So this, the king is going to get where it needs to go. Well, even here he's got to be a little bit careful. But he should be able to hold. But this is at least tricky. Probably the best would be this check, and then knight c5, just maintaining the blockade over e4. Anyway, in the game, black played king f6, and now white should just play knight takes e6, so this is kind of incredible. Knight e6, just game over. The only thing I can think of is that white had seen puzzles before where what you do is you stalemate the white king, but the g-pawn's still on the board, and then you force him to play g5 in a position where you can play h takes g5. But the problem is that there's no way for white to set that up, because if you stalemate the king and then g5, h takes g5 are the next two moves, it's still going to be stalemate. There's no stalemate which could be relieved by playing h takes g5. So this would just end the game on the spot. Or even better, maybe g5 check, and now knight takes e6. So this is even better. Better way of doing the same thing, I suppose. Well, in the game, white played king e4. Here again, g5 check. G5 is even better because he can't even disregard this. He has to take it. And now knight e6, and then king f3, king g2, king h1, draw. All right, so another mistake. But still a simple draw. He's got a fortress. Okay, here, king e4 would have been best. And now you can just collect. I'm going to play knight takes f4, if given the chance. And after this, then knight e5, dead draw. All right, so instead, white played knight e4 check. Still completely fine. Okay, knight to d3 would be simplest, but he played knight e4. And now just a horrible move, but a horrible move on two counts. One way in which it was a horrible move is forgivable. But the other way, it's really not, or it's a lot less. The way in which it's forgivable is that, of course, anyone can make a blunder. where no one's immune to it, especially at the end of a long game. I mean, this is move 66. We get tired. You're calculating. There's the psychological pressure of defending for a long time. So it's, under those circumstances, it's very easy to make a mistake. So that's understandable. The way in which it's less forgivable is that you have a simple draw. So you don't have to do anything to draw. You've already achieved the draw. So a move like knight takes g5 can only be trouble. I mean, maybe he thought he was winning, but you got to calculate that out till you're ready to bet your grandmother's life on it practically. To use some weird expression I heard about going into a king and pawn ending when you're down material. Unless you're 100% sure that the ending is a draw or more for you, it's insane to give up a dead drawn position to go to that. There's absolutely nothing that black can do here. You can't win the g pawn. You can't push the e pawn, well, without losing it. And there's no way to put white in a Zugzwang. The king and the bishop cannot control, and the h pawn cannot control all of the possible squares. So, in light of that, it's just a terrible mistake to play knight takes g5. There's no excuse for doing this. Again, unless you just hastily calculated and thought you were winning, but it's losing. hg, king e4, king g2. Okay, if king f5, king f3 is simplest, but also just e4 with the same basic winning pattern as in the game. Okay, so in the game was king e5, king g3, king f5, king h4. And it's cute, but a 1300 should know this pattern. So it's always nice when it happens in your games and you get to win like this, but it's inexcusable for 1900 to not know this. Again, unless he's just tired. But I mean, for sure, he could have calculated this. It was just a matter of maybe not having enough time or being tired, whatever the case. But clearly, this is a pattern that he had to have known. Anyway, white is just, now there's just nothing to play for. Just continued a few moves out of inertia and gave up here. All right, so that was that game. And now we've got, yes, once again, so it's a clean sweep. Black in every game here. So e4, e5. This is between Ostik, who's 1612, and Blobby12, who's submitted games to us before. It was 1811 at the time of this game. Played on the chess.com server as well. All right, and this is interesting. This is actually something that you may want to pay attention to because there's a neat gambit in this. So the usual move here is bishop to b4, and it's standard. It's good enough for equality. I've played this, but it's dry. It's not. It is equalizing, so I have no doubt in my mind about that whatsoever. But while it's equalizing, it's fairly flat. It's hard to beat a lower rated player from this. You can, but it's going to take you a lot of work. So Blobby's idea here, not that he made this up. I mean, there is some theory behind this, but it's a pretty interesting alternative. Certainly worth giving a try. So bishop takes f3. Now, here white played knight takes d5, and correctly so, because g takes f3. It's a very good move in the analogous Sicilian line. So if you stick white's pawn, or black's pawn, the one that's on c7, if you put it on e7, then this is a very, very dangerous line for black. But here, it's completely fine for him. So queen d4. Now, in the Sicilian version, white plays takes, and knight to b5. The difference here is that it's just useless. Bishop to b4 check, and then knight to e6. So there aren't any tricks. Black's simply up a pawn with a better structure and just better all the way around. So instead of that, white would have to try bishop to e3, but queen b4, a3, takes, knight b5, bishop d6, rook b1, queen f6. And white's got the bishop pair, nice active rook on b7, but he's still down a pawn. And his king side, well, all of his pawns are kind of weak. So black is a bit better here. So it's playable for white. So maybe I shouldn't give this a question mark, but a dubious sign. But ultimately, it's favorable for black. So knight takes d5, as played in the game, is correct. Bishop d1, knight c7, king d7, knight a8. All right, now, here, black played bishop to g4, which is not a bad move, but the more common bishop to h5, I think, is better. And we'll see why in a moment. A move that has not been played, but may in fact be good, and the engine suggests this, is bishop to c2. So the reason why it's unattractive is very obvious. I mean, the bishop takes away the c2 square from the knight, so there's no forking possibilities, and it looks like the bishop can just get attacked. But the key point behind this is that it takes d1 from white's king. So that may in fact be a good point in his favor. Anyway, it's kind of surprising. I mean, it seems like black has a little bit of an embarrassment of riches here. Anyway, bishop to g4 is played. Again, I think not the best move. So here, d5 is, I think, the only try for any kind of an edge at all. So now, knight to d4. And here, two possibilities, bishop to d3 and f3. And f3 is the reason why bishop to h5, I think, is a bit more accurate. This wouldn't even be a possibility then. Nevertheless, with accurate play, black is fine. So knight to c2 check. Okay, if king to d1, then we play bishop f5, of course. So king f2, check, here, check. All this time, white is up in the exchange in a pawn, but the knight on a8 is in danger, the rook on a1 is hanging, the king is exposed, so it's hard to tell what exactly is going on here. So bishop f4, covering the diagonal and developing. Okay, knight f6. So right now white's up a pawn. Rook e1 check. King d8. Of course, he always has to worry about his knight still. And there's the threat of knight to h5 check too. So rook c1, knight h5 check, king h4, bishop e7 check, king h5, g6 check, king h6, and then we finish with the perpetual. So this is kind of like a kingside version of the famous Hampy Alligator game. The game that starts with e4, e5, knight c3, bishop c5, knight a4, bishop takes f2 check. Very famous, great old game where I think it's the white king is going back and forth from b5 and a6 to perpetual check with the bishop on d7 and c8. So very similar kind of mechanism. Anyway, so that's f3 from here. Bishop to d3 is the alternative. Knight f6, and now two tries. But in both cases, I think black ends up better. For instance, castles, bishop e2. Takes, takes, king over, takes, takes. Okay, maybe rook f c1 is, I don't know if it's slightly better, but it's another way to go. Actually, the reason why rook f c1 may be better is that there could be some line after black plays bishop to d6 and white inevitably plays knight to b6 check, where after AB, white wants to play A4, maybe A5, and there it's sensible to have the rook on the A file. But still, black is at least fine and maybe better. Here, he is better. The rooks, well, the key thing, let me go back to the position. The key point, and this is very important, whenever you're assessing these situations where it's a rook and pawn versus two minor pieces, ask yourself, can the rooks do anything? Can the pawns do anything? If they can't, assume that the minor pieces are better, unless they're just self-evidently very, very bad, very passive. Bad bishop, dominated pieces, that kind of thing. But as long as the bishops are the minor pieces are just reasonably healthy, you should prefer them unless the rooks are really operating very, very nicely, or unless the pawns are meaningful. Like there's passers, there's what's the word I'm trying to look for? A pawn mass that can move forward. That's got has the power to expand and start constricting the enemy forces. So here, that's not really happening. The only asymmetry in the pawn structure is the pawn on d5, but that's not going anywhere. It's blockaded, and it's likely that someday, after a pair of rooks are exchanged, that black will try to absorb and collect this pawn. So that's no good for white. Okay. Alternatively, there's bishop to e3, bishop b4 check, king f1, bishop f5, rook d1, takes, knight c2. And I think this position is equal as well. Well, like the f3 position, not like the other variations. One possible continuation. And I think black is maybe even a touch better here. So this time white has two pawns in addition to the rook from the two minor pieces, and it's two knights rather than a bishop and a knight. So it's a relatively favorable version for white, but nevertheless, here too, black is very, very active, and the pawns are not that meaningful. So It's playable for both sides, but I think black is still doing quite well. So this variation, I think, with bishop takes f3, is really one that's very much worth considering. Okay, so back to the game. Again, bishop h5 I think is better than bishop to g4. All right, and here white played bishop to e3, which was a mistake for sure. Well, it's just losing a tempo for starters. Bishop to b4 check, bishop d2. Here, black could just trade and play knight to e7, pick up the knight, and is clearly better. But what he did is okay too. Knight f6 probably is not quite as accurate. Bishop b4 and then f3 is only a little bit worse for white. But in the game, white blundered with bishop to b5, and now it's just a catastrophe. Rook check, the bishop drops, and there's no d5 because the knight on f6 covers it. So king f1 takes f3, and yeah, it's just nothing to be done here. So the knight is secure on d5, the knight on a8 is not secure, and black is going to have 3 pieces for a rook. So white resigned here. So this gambit, I think, is quite good. And in fact, I think I'll probably start playing it myself the next time I go down that road. All right, finally, I have a viewer question, or 3 viewer questions. One about a particular chess variation. The other 2 are just are talky questions. All right, so let me begin with the analysis question. So this is about a gambit. This is from Schleichnaldo, and he asks, what do I think, and this is from white's point of view finally, so we'll flip it around. What do I think about this gambit with b3 and bishop to b2 against the French, and also what do I think about it against the Caro-Kann? And the idea is to continue after black takes with knight c3 and then queen e2 and castles queenside and so on. So he likes it. He says he's done well with it. And okay, I think there's nothing really wrong with it, but I don't think it's really terrifying for black either. So, you know, there's always there's always an up and a down side to playing a little sideline like this. So the upside is that a lot of people will be surprised by this, certainly the first time out when they see it. Secondly, you know, you develop experience with it, so you get a good feel for what you're doing, and that helps. That being familiar with the position is always an advantage. Now, there are drawbacks to this, to playing a sideline like this. The first is that black doesn't really have to know very much to get a good game. I don't think it's objectively terribly dangerous. The second thing is that it becomes incredibly boring, and you don't develop. You know, you're I think limiting your growth as a player if you stick to lines like this for too long. So there's nothing wrong with trying lines like this. In fact, that's part of how you grow. It's when you stick to this and you don't really explore the richer variations that, you know, you're doing yourself a disservice. So anyway, as far as specifics go, I think black is fine. So for instance, knight c6. Okay, if you castle right away, then this is fine for black. Okay, so let's say knight e4, bishop e7. Okay, if you castle right away, then I think a5 is good. You could also play knight to d4 there. Knight f3 is pretty typical to stop knight to d4 ideas. Castles, castles, a5. And this counterattacking plan seems to do pretty well for black. I think, in fact, his score, if I remember right, is positive from here. And just the play is very natural. Of course, white has ideas too, you know, to play rook g1, g4, and so on. So it's a race. You know, it's just a matter of who gets there faster. And I would just say that I don't think white's king is tremendously safe. It doesn't mean that he's in trouble, but the play is not going to be all in one direction. So black has a variety of ideas. There's a5, a4 taking and trying to use the file. There's playing e5, even as a pawn sack, maybe after playing a4 and swapping. And then the bishop comes to f5 or to e6. Also on knight takes e5, there might be positions where you play knight to d4 for black. So there can be a lot of activity. Also knight to d5 can be useful. So the knight doesn't have to stay on the diagonal because white doesn't really have any obvious way for a while of creating real pressure against g7. Here, okay, so if d4, for instance, then a4. If a4, then knight to d5 is quite playable. b6 is the usual move. And this is pretty good, too. You know, white might like to play d3, but then bishop to a6 is annoying. The bishop's also very good on b7, putting some pressure on the knight on e4. And also, again, if white wants to play rook g1, g4 ideas, well, that bishop on b7 is going to be very good, hitting on that long diagonal. So I think black is doing fine there. In the Caro-Kann version, it's a bit different. So b6, or c6, b3, d5 here. Okay, knight c3, knight f6. And now, okay, one difference is that black can play bishop to f5, which he couldn't do in the French version. So the plus for black in the French version is that he can put the knight on c6. Oops, sorry. Put the knight on c6. Yeah, you can also do that against g4. And black is probably better here. But okay, queen e2, knight c6. So you can't do that with the Caro-Kann version, but what you can do is put the bishop on f5. And really, I don't see any reason whatsoever to think poorly of black's chances here. It's also possible to play more quietly with knight b to d7. And then when white castles long, again, a5. Even as a gambit. And this was played in a game between Raprincev and Dreyev in an internet blitz game in 2003, won by Dreyev down the road. So in sum, I don't think this gambit is terribly frightening. It's not really a gambit. I mean, white almost always gets the pawn back. But as long as black knows what he's doing, I think his position is very solid. And when you castle queenside, the plan with a5, a4 gives black sufficient counterplay over there. All right, so now let's get to the verbal questions as opposed to the chess questions. So the first one is again from Exitvono or Zitvono, and so he says this. He says, I've noticed that in my games I've reached an exchange ending fairly frequently. And what he means by this is that one side has a rook, the other side has a minor piece, and both sides have pawns. He asks, can you talk about some winning or drawing plans for each player, both in the cases where the pawns are relatively equal and the rook has an advantage, and the case where the minor piece has an advantage because of a significant pawn majority? Is it usually better to have a knight or a bishop here? Well, that's a lot to get into, and I would just give the cop-out answer that it really depends on a lot of things. And to list all of those things would, of course, be the subject for multiple shows. But what I'll say a little bit to help you out here. So the first thing I would say is that you should think of minor pieces being worth more than 3 points. Think of them as worth 3 1/4, 3 1/2, whatever. Enough so that way you think, when it's a rook versus minor pieces, if the minor piece side has 2 pawns, that side's better. If the side with the minor piece only has 1 pawn, the rook side is better. So that's the first bit of advice. Second, again, more general wisdom. If there are pawns on both sides, generally you're going to want to have the bishop rather than a knight. A bishop, of course, can keep a closer eye on what's going on both sides of the board. For the knight, generally speaking, that's going to be much more difficult to do. So, all things being equal, with pawns on both wings, the bishop would be the better minor piece to have. As for rooks, they're lousy defenders. So one thing that you'll want to keep in mind, whether the rook is the better side or the defending side, keep your rook active. Even if it means sacrificing a pawn, maybe 2 pawns in some cases. If it helps you to create a passed pawn or some kind of an attack or counterplay, do that. So those would be some very general guidelines. Beyond that, of course, you have to look more carefully at specific positions. All right, last question, and then that will be the end of that. But let me give a reminder, so don't run away after I address this last question, which comes from a player who calls himself a novice named Ayman bin Moshe. And he asks, when you do not win, what are your feelings? And that's a great question. I think a lot of players react differently. Certainly I've reacted differently at different points in my life. But I would say it depends, once again. And here are some of the things that it depends on. So one is, was I a favorite in the game or was I an underdog? What was the tournament significance? If it was in the first round, I may feel one way. If it's in the last round and, I didn't win money or a prize or get a norm because of that, I'm going to feel a different way. Another question that I think is really important, and in some ways the most important to me, is did I play well or did I play badly? If I played really well, but the guy was just better than me, just played a better game, I might be a little bit disappointed. I might feel upset. I don't like losing, but there are players who are just better than you, and if you played well, what can you do? You can at least feel like you gave it your best, and then you just try to learn so your best will be better next time. So I think that's part of it. And then also you said, well, when I don't win, you can also draw a game. So a draw, I mean, again, it depends on the significance, but generally speaking, I'm not going to be terribly upset about a draw as long as it was with a player who's roughly a peer of mine, someone who's roughly around my rating, and and it wasn't in some circumstance where that really cost me seriously. So a normal draw, if I've played a decent game against an opponent who's roughly my strength, okay, that's all right. I'm not a player who hates draws. I push, I try to win, but if a game's a draw, I'm not going to go crazy and lose doing whatever I possibly can to avoid it. Now, if I'm playing a lower-rated player, I'm going to push. But if a player, is around my rating, or if it's just really clearly a draw, and I've tried my best, I'm not going to be distraught about the draw. So I would say it depends on those things. But generally speaking, the most important thing to me is if I played well. Obviously, I want to play perfectly, but if I played a good game and the guy was just better than me, then again, it's not that I'm happy about it, but I just kind of shrug my shoulders, tip my hat to the guy, shake his hand, and try to learn so my best will be better next time. If I played badly, or if I did something that I should have known better, even if I won or drew, I'll be kind of upset about that. More upset, of course, if I lost. But I want to play a good game. I want to try to play well. It's not just about winning. It's about doing something. It's about achieving something. About proving yourself in a tournament context. And I think that for me is the most important. All right. So let me conclude all of this by saying, first of all, if this does end up being the last show or the last regular show, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. I hope you guys have enjoyed it too, despite the insane length of this show in particular. But still, gets you your money's worth. Excuse me. I have enjoyed it, and I'll definitely still keep my eyes open for what's going on here. But I do hope it's not the end. So by all means, I want your feedback. Give your feedback to the powers that be as well. But let me know in the comments if you think that the credits approach that Greg and others use would be something that you'd be interested in doing. So let me know, and we'll see how it goes. So thanks a lot. Best wishes to everybody. I'll still exist. Don't forget my blog, thechessmind.net. So that's always there for your viewing pleasure. And all right, and maybe I'll see you again on here too. I hope so. So take care. Good luck, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.